The storm had rolled in without the slightest hint of warning. No slow drizzle, no gentle clouds gathering, just a sudden, violent release of the heavens. Thick sheets of rain slammed against the diner windows, each drop hitting with such force it sounded like the sky itself was grieving. Lightning flickered across the horizon, briefly illuminating the lonely road outside before thunder rolled in like an angry drum. Inside the small roadside diner, the usual morning warmth was missing. The place that normally hummed with chatter, clinking cups, and regulars laughing over coffee was unusually quiet. Only one man sat inside, tucked into a corner booth with a light from the neon, open sign flickered in tired pulses on his face. Rowan Hale, a single father, a man who carried exhaustion like a second skin. His eyes were tired, the kind of tired that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from long years of pushing through life storms without rest. His hands were rough, callous from juggling 2 part-time jobs, neither of which paid enough, but both of which were necessary. For weeks, he had lived off instant noodles and whatever scraps he could find on sale. Every penny went to rent, to childcare, to keeping his 8-year-old daughter Mira clothed and fed. But today, he had scraped enough spare cash to buy himself a real breakfast. Not a feast, not even anything fancy. Just a warm plate of eggs, toast, and a small side of hash browns, the kind of meal most people order without thinking. But for Rowan, it felt like a celebration. He stared at the plate with a softness in his eyes, as if he were afraid it might disappear if he blinked. He hadn't tasted a proper breakfast in almost a month. He lifted his fork, ready for first bite, and then he saw her. She stumbled through the diner doors like a ghost blown in by the storm. The bell above the entrance jingled weakly as if startled by her arrival. She was trembling so violently it looked as though the cold had seeped into her bones. Rainwater dripped from her clothes, forming small puddles at her feet. Her hair, once beautiful perhaps, was plastered tightly to her face, sticking in messy strands against her cheeks. But it was her expression that froze Rowan in place. Despair. Deep, hollow, unguarded despair. She looked like someone who had been running, not from the rain, but from something darker, something that carved fear into the very shape of her breathing. The waitress, startled, hurried toward her with a towel. "Oh, my goodness, sweetheart, what do you need?" The woman's lips parted, but only a faint whisper slipped out, almost swallowed by the thunder rumbling outside. "Help, please." The word trembled. Fragile, barely alive, Rowan didn't know why he stood. Maybe it was instinct, some deeply buried part of him that refused to ignore suffering when he saw it. Maybe it was the way her desperation mirrored his own struggles from years ago. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the memory of his little girl Mira telling him once, "Daddy, helping someone is like giving them your sunshine." Whatever the reason, he didn't think. He simply moved. He picked up his barely touched plate, still warm in his hands, and walked toward the stranger. She flinched when he approached, as though bracing for harm. Rowan slowed, lowering his voice to something gentle, something steady. "Here," he said, placing the plate in front of her on an empty table. "You need this more than I do." Her fingers, thin, shaking, reached out slowly. She didn't just look hungry. She looked heartbroken, lost, terrified. She devoured the sandwich like someone who hadn't eaten in days, tears slipping down her cheeks, mixing with the raindrops still clinging to her skin. Rowan felt something tighten painfully in his chest. He sat across from her quietly, not touching anything, just making sure she didn't collapse. After a long moment, she finally spoke, voice barely audible. A Raven, her name. She offered no last name, no explanation. Not where she came from. Not what she was running from. Not why her clothes looked torn, or why her eyes held more shadows than light. But Rowan didn't ask. He recognized silence born from trauma. He had lived in that silence once, after Mira's mother passed away and left him drowning in grief and bills and an overwhelming fear of failing his own child. When Era finished eating, she didn't leave. She just sat there, staring at the empty wrapper, as if it were the last thing tethering her to the world. The storm outside began to calm, the thunder fading into distant rumbles, but her breathing stayed shallow, uneven, like she was still trapped inside some invisible storm of her own. Rowan excused himself gently and stepped aside to call Mira's school, telling them he would be late picking her up. Then he returned to Era and draped his jacket over her shoulders, even though it left him shivering. She tried to refuse. He didn't let her. Her wide-eyed surprise said everything. Kindness was something she had not seen in a very, very long time. For over an hour, they sat in that quiet diner. Era slowly thawed, not physically, but emotionally. Her posture eased. Her hands steadied. Her expression softened, though fear still flickered behind her eyes like an ember that refused to go out. She told Rowan she had no money, no phone, no belongings except a small camera she clutched to her chest like a lifeline. Rowan offered to drive her somewhere safe, but she shook her head violently, panic slicing across her face. He didn't ask again. Instead, he offered the small handful of change he had left his dinner money, so she could buy another meal later, even though it meant he would have to go hungry again. She took it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice cracked like glass. When she finally stood to leave, Rowan felt dread stir inside him, like he was watching someone walk into a darkness he couldn't reach into. She hesitated at the door, looking back at him only once, her eyes shimmering with something he didn't understand. Then she disappeared into the rain-washed daylight. Rowan never saw her again. Not that day, not that week, not even that month. But the consequences of that stormy morning were already moving toward him, quietly, steadily, about to change everything he thought he knew about kindness, about fate, and about the strange, powerful ways lives can collide. 3 long weeks of ordinary days, of work shifts that dragged on forever, of packing Mira's lunches, of worrying about bills, of trying to hold everything together as he always had. The morning at the diner slowly faded into a memory he replayed in quiet moments, mostly wondering if the woman, Era, was safe. Then one afternoon, Rowan came home to find a letter in his mailbox. Not the usual stack of bills or overdue notices. This one was different, sleek, heavy, expensive, embossed with a seal he didn't recognize but instinctively distrusted because people like him didn't receive letters from people who used seals. His stomach twisted. Lawyers didn't send letters to struggling single fathers without a reason, and rarely a good one. Hands shaking, Rowan opened it. Inside was a short, formal message. "Mr. Hale, we request your presence at the Vinn and Alder firm for a matter of urgent and personal importance regarding Miss Raven Vinn." Era? He blinked, rereading the name over and over. The woman from the diner, the trembling stranger he'd fed, the one who vanished into the storm. His heart pounded painfully. Why would lawyers be involved? Why him? Had something happened to her? Was she hurt? Was he the last person who saw her? Guilt and fear swelled in his chest. But he couldn't ignore the letter. He needed answers. The next morning, after dropping Mira off at school, Rowan took the long bus ride across the city. He stepped off in front of a towering glass building that reflected the sky so perfectly it seemed to swallow clouds whole. Everything inside screamed wealth. Marble floors, chrome fixtures polished to a mirror shine, people in sharp suits moving with purpose. Rowan felt painfully out of place in his worn jeans and fraying jacket sleeves. His boots squeaked embarrassingly on the polished floor. But a receptionist guided him to a quiet conference room overlooking the city. He waited with his hands clenched tightly in his lap. Then 2 attorneys entered, carrying a thick folder. "Mr. Hale," the older one greeted. "We represent Ms. Raven." Rowan's pulse kicked. "Is she okay?" "She is safe," the attorney replied gently. "Thanks largely to you." Relief hit so hard he had to grip the edge of the table. "But why am I here?" Rowan asked. "I don't understand. I barely know her." The younger attorney opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. Rowan stared. It was Era, but not the Era he had met. She stood in front of what looked like a prestigious art gallery, smiling radiantly, dressed in stylish clothing, confidence in her posture. She looked alive, brilliant, nothing like the broken woman he had seen in the diner. "Ms. Vinn," the attorney explained, "is a renowned photographer and the sole heir to a substantial family trust. But she has also been battling severe trauma following a violent confrontation with an individual who attempted to exploit her work and personal life. Rowan's breath caught. She escaped. The lawyer continued softly. And in her panic, she ran, abandoning everything, her home, her money, her safety. She looked homeless, Rowan murmured. She looked terrified. She was, the attorney replied. Trauma strips a person bare, Mr. Hale. Wealth doesn't shield a mind. The younger attorney leaned forward. When she had nothing, not even hope, you gave her food, warmth, dignity. You were the only person who helped her. Rowan shook his head. Anyone would have. No, she interrupted. Most people didn't. Not a single person, except you stopped to help her. Silence settled between them. Then the older attorney opened the folder further and slid several documents toward him. Before leaving for an undisclosed recovery center, Ms. Vin gave us strict instructions. She will not be reachable for some time, but she wanted to ensure the kindness you showed her is never forgotten. Rowan frowned. What is all this? The attorney smiled faintly. It is a financial grant in your name and your daughter's. Enough to cover stable housing, childcare, and 3 full years of living expenses while you pursue any education or career path you choose. Rowan froze. The words didn't feel real. They sounded like something from a dream he wasn't allowed to have. Ms. Vin said, the attorney flipped the page, and I quote, he gave me a meal when I felt like a ghost, so I want to give him back his future. Rowan's throat tightened. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the enormity of those words. I don't deserve this, he whispered. I didn't do anything special. You gave hope to someone who had lost everything. The lawyer replied gently. Sometimes that's worth more than you realize. Tears stung Rowan's eyes. He looked away, overwhelmed. A single breakfast. A simple act he didn't think twice about. And yet it had changed the course of someone's life. And now, astonishingly, someone was changing his. He left the building with trembling hands, clutching the folder like it contained sunlight. The sky was clear, soft beams of daylight glimmering across the city. For the first time in years, Rowan didn't feel crushed by the weight of survival. He felt something else, gratitude, relief, and a fierce determination to honor the chance he'd been given. In the months that followed, Rowan's life transformed in quiet but profound ways. He and Mira moved into a small, safe apartment where the roof didn't leak, where the walls didn't smell of mold, where Mira could sleep without hearing arguments through paper-thin walls. She decorated her new room with bright drawings, taped them proudly to her closet doors. Rowan enrolled in a technical drafting program, a dream he had abandoned years ago because dreams didn't pay bills. Now he studied late into the night, pencil in hand, rediscovering passions he thought life had stripped from him. Mira blossomed in ways he hadn't seen before. New clothes that fit, healthy meals, books she could finally afford to bring home, friends she invited over without shame, laughter that filled the apartment like a warm breeze. And every few weeks, Rowan stopped by the diner, not because he expected Era to walk in, but because part of him wanted to honor the place where their paths crossed, the place where his life unknowingly began to change. Sometimes he sat in the same booth she once occupied, looking out at the window streaked with sunlight instead of stormwater. He wondered if she was healing somewhere far away, if she was safe, if she remembered him as clearly as he remembered her. He didn't know if she would ever come back, but he hoped one day she might, not broken, not afraid, but whole, smiling, free. And until then, he carried forward the lessons she'd carved into his life. Kindness can bridge impossible distances, even when no one is watching, even when you think it doesn't matter, even when the world feels too big and too hard. Sometimes a single act, a meal, a jacket, a moment of gentleness, can become the turning point in someone else's story. And sometimes, if fate is watching, it becomes a turning point in yours, too.